This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. 3 monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
We have now 856 members in Honolulu, which continues to make us the largest vegetarian society in North America. Medical doctor for Kaiser Permanente for several years in the emergency department since 1970. He was the newsletter editor up until a couple months ago, and now he continues to be involved. He's been on the board, he continues to be involved, and he is now the video coordinator. He wrote a book called The Scientific Basis of Vegetarianism, and he's been a vegetarian himself since 1950 and a vegan since 1963. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Bill Harris.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Someday when I'm old and gray, which I think will probably be sometime around the middle of next week, I'm going to make a list of all the goofy ideas that I've seen come along in 46 years as a vegetarian and 36 years as a physician. And I'm going to make up a little scorecard. I'm going to put health kooks on one side, establishment on the other side, and I'm going to give each bad idea a score. And we'll count them all up and see who's been giving the worst advice and who's had the worst effect on society's health. I'll tip my hand right off by telling you that the establishment is going to win this one hands down, if for no other reason than that when the establishment says something, everybody believes it. But if the health kooks say it, hardly anybody takes it seriously. I'll give you a couple of examples of goofy ideas. For instance, you may remember a few years back, there was a chap who claimed to be a breatharian. A breatharian must be the logical end point of first being a vegetarian and then being a vegan, and then after that a fruitarian, and then you just stop eating everything and just breathe the air and get all the nourishment you need that way. If anybody goes for that, I have some swampland down in Florida that I'll sell real cheap. But anyway, the guy that popularized this idea was unfrocked one day when he was caught coming out of McDonald's with a hamburger under his arm. The establishment has racked up a few. Thalidomide would be a good example of an establishment mistake. Thalidomide was hyped as a perfectly safe sedative for pregnant women back in the 60s and 70s, and found out that it was that was the one population group you should never give the stuff to, because it caused the babies to be born with very short arms and short legs. That was called phocomelia. A lot of what I'm going to be saying or talking about is the misuse of words, and you can get into lots of trouble by using words improperly. I'll give you some examples. In the commercial line, the name Coca-Cola in China was first rendered Kiko Kila, which means bite the wax tadpole, or female horse stuffed with wax, depending on the dialect. In Taiwan, the translation of the Pepsi slogan was "Come alive with the Pepsi generation," came out as "Pepsi will bring your ancestors back from the dead." Also in Chinese, the Kentucky Fried Chicken slogan, "Finger licking good," came out as "Eat your fingers off." Ford had a big problem in Brazil when the Pinto flopped. The Pinto was Brazilian slang for tiny male genitals. So Ford renamed it the Corcel, which means horse. Parker Pen marketed a ballpoint pen in Mexico. Its ads were supposed to say, "It won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you." Instead, the ad said, "It won't leak in your pocket and make you pregnant." Chicken Man Frank Perdue's slogan, "It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken," turned out as, "It takes a hard man to make a chicken aroused." And finally, Japan's second largest tourist agency was mystified when it entered English-speaking markets and began receiving requests for unusual sex tours upon finding out why the owners of the Kinky Nippon Tourist Company changed its name. This is what the Bible says about what humans should eat. And I'm sure you're all aware of this one. This comes from the first chapter of Genesis, and it fairly succinctly says that we're supposed to be vegetarians. I don't usually go the biblical route because I find that you can argue just about any side of any argument known to man using quotations from the Bible, and I expect that if I ran into this chap who is a cannibal chieftain and asked him why he eats people, he'd say, well, if the great Zuzu hadn't wanted people to eat people, he wouldn't have made them out of meat. There are about 40 essential nutrients in the human diet, and the first element of semantic confusion I want to clear up is the difference between an essential nutrient and an essential metabolite. An essential metabolite is something you have to have in your body in order for normal metabolism to occur. And there's probably tens of thousands of essential metabolites. Essential nutrients are things that you have to have in your diet in order to have normal metabolism. And there are about 50 of those, and about half of them are minerals. We can dispose of the minerals right off by saying that they are synthesized neither by animals nor by plants, or synthesized by stars. They're the result of nuclear fusion processes that go on in stars. And here they are: calcium, chloride, chromium, cobalt, etc. These are all things that you have to have in your diet. Protein, amino acids. All of the essential amino acids are synthesized either by plants or microorganisms. None of them are synthesized by animals. So when you eat animal protein, you're just getting your protein secondhand. All of the organic material on Earth begins with photosynthesis. The plant starts with minerals from the soil and water from the soil and sunlight and carbon dioxide, and makes glucose first, and then after that it manufactures all of the other essentials, the amino acids and the vitamins. And here they are, essential organic nutrients. Now most of these are vitamins, and I'm going to pick a fight with the people that call things vitamins right off by asking for the definition of vitamin. Organic molecules in food required for normal metabolism, which can't be synthesized in adequate amounts by the human body. Well, now, the word vitamin is a neologism. It was invented around the turn of the century by Casimir Funk. It caught on very fast. His idea was that vitamin would be a good name to call these things because he thought they were vital amines. But then they found out that not all of the so-called vitamins had amine groups in them. I think it would probably be a better idea if we just stopped calling things vitamins and called them essential nutrients, because what happens when you call them vitamins is that all of the schlockmeisters climb on board and try to define everything to be a vitamin. Okay, here's things that have been called vitamins in the past. They're really not vitamins: bioflavonoids, carnitine, and inositol. And finally down here, pangamic acid. Anybody remember pangamic acid from a few years back? It was hyped in all the health food stores as the latest important vitamin. They tried to tack the name vitamin B15 on this, but nobody ever identified the structure of this molecule, and it never was a vitamin. And in fact, it was a big bogus claim. But when you have a nifty buzzword like vitamin, everybody wants to get on board and make some money off the idea. A vitamin is really a Madison Avenue term, and it would be much better if we call these things essential metabolites. Laetrile is a very questionable treatment for cancer. You may have heard that, popular just south of the border. It's been tested by the establishment, which is not invariably right, but nevertheless they haven't been able to find any value in using laetrile in the treatment of cancer. Nevertheless, the folks that cooked that one up wanted to call it vitamin B17. Might be a good idea to just talk about essential nutrients and non-essential nutrients. Here's a real vitamin. This is vitamin B12, and this is the Achilles heel of vegan nutrition because you can't get this from plants. It is actually only synthesized by bacteria, which are single-celled plants, but apparently we have lost the ability to absorb the vitamin B12 that is manufactured in our own intestines. So if you go on a vegan diet after 3 years, you'll probably have to take B12 supplements. It's not much of a problem because it only costs about a nickel a day, and that's a whole lot less than $30,000 down the line for a coronary artery bypass graft if you continue to eat grease, deep fried, and hot fat, which is what the American diet consists of. From an evolutionary standpoint, we are the descendants of a long line of vegetarian primates. This is a list of all the primates, such as the gorilla and the orangutan, are strict vegetarians. Nobody ever caught a gorilla eating a Big Mac, at least until they brought them into the zoos. And it now turns out that the zookeepers are feeding their gorillas about a pound of meat a day. And now they're getting kind of surprised because some of their gorillas are turning out to have heart attacks. And I sort of expected that might happen when I heard about it 10 years ago, and it sounds like that's what's happening. Well, the big, heavy primates are vegetarians. Then the little guys down here, they only weigh maybe 250 grams. They eat a lot of bugs. And the reason why big primates are vegetarian and little primates are insectivores is because only the little primates can catch the bugs without wasting more energy than they're going to accumulate by eating the bugs. The big primates also turn out to be the smartest of the primates, which may be due to the fact that if you're a big primate living in a tree and all the goodies are out there in the terminal branches, if you aren't very smart in the way that you move from branch to branch, you're going to drop out of the tree and out of evolution. As 4 million years ago, the forests in Central Africa receded, and the primates came down out of the trees and they started scavenging around for whatever they could find to eat, which was animals and plants. And there was a certain value to this. If you were a scavenger, let's imagine this is a bison here instead of a deer, and your friends in the tribe are out gathering plant foods, you're going to score about 185 times as many calories from killing one bison as they will be able to collect in going after plant foods in a day's time. So there's a big advantage under those conditions. And you can see very easily how a preference for animal food would develop in cases where there was not much food to go around. 12,000 years ago, we had a big time change in our feeding habits. Instead of being hunter-gatherers, we became farmers. And this happened primarily in the Mediterranean. We started raising grains, wheat, barley, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. Now, grain was really the basis of the agricultural revolution, and I'm going to try to make the argument that the only thing that switch of diet really accomplished was that it allowed us to achieve a huge population. That stuff is really cheap. Growing food gives you a lot more calories per labor hour. For instance, wheat is going to get you about 140,000 calories versus just a tiny amount from hunting animals, as the Kung hunters and the Aceh hunters still do. The big thing that the Egg revolution did, however, was to produce a massive population explosion. About a million years ago, there were 125,000 humans or pre-humans on the planet. We then had a cultural revolution, which was the discovery of the use of tools to make things and to fight disputes with. And that was very adaptive, so the human population went way up. And by the time of the Egg revolution, there was about 5 million people on the planet. By the time the Egg revolution was over, about 4000 AD, the population was 85 million. So the Egg revolution spurred a 16-fold population explosion. And we're still having one, but you can't see it on this particular graph very well because this is a logarithmic plot, and it's just the way these graphs go. We're right in the middle of a massive population explosion. Which brings us to Allgaier's theorem. There are only two things wrong with the world. There's too damn many people in it, and they're eating the wrong food. I'm going to discuss with you some of the virtues of a grain-based agriculture. There are 18 grains. I put them into a computer spreadsheet in 100-gram portions, and then I averaged out their values. And if you ate nothing but grains for your full day's calorie requirements, you'd get a fairly decent balance of food, although you would be short on all the things to the left of this arrow. This arrow represents the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA. So you wouldn't get much vitamin C, you wouldn't get any B12, no vitamin A, or very little vitamin A. You'd be short on vitamin E, which is alpha-tocopherol, short on calcium, short on folate, and short on riboflavin. All the other things you're in pretty good shape on. But here's the big switcher. It's only going to cost you $1.29 for a day's food. Now, this doesn't necessarily represent the price structure as it was back at the beginning of the Ag Revolution, but it certainly has some bearing on it. And it certainly is the reason why we, as vegetarians, are often recommending to people that they base their diet on grains. I think that if we look a little farther, we'll see that there are better food choices. Here's 93 vegetables. You can see that if you meet your calorie requirements from just eating the 93 averaged vegetables that I fed into this spreadsheet, you're going to be way over on everything. Vitamin C, huge amounts. Folate, vitamin A, potassium, magnesium. The only thing that you won't have is vitamin B12. This is the RDA. 100% of the RDA goes up this red line, and the only thing that you're short on is cobalamin. But look at the price. It's going to be $11.55. Problems with vegetables, especially back around the time of the Ag Revolution. What's the one thing you can predict about vegetables that are left out for, say, 3 or 4 days? They're going to spoil. And unless you have refrigeration, you are going to lose those vegetables. So one of the reasons why grain became a popular item back in the Ag Revolution was because it's cheap and it's also easily stored. You don't have to have refrigeration. Some apologists for meat will say, well, another reason to eat meat is because there are some places on the planet where the only thing you can grow on the land is animals. And if this was Europe, you'd probably see cows all over this hill. But in fact, this is China. And the Chinese like their rice so much that they will go to the extent of making terraced rice paddies, really an architectural feat, so they can grow rice on the side of mountains. Well, here comes the real disaster in nutritional advice. This is the advice that the establishment has been giving us on the subject of what we should eat. Now, this is a week's supply of meat and similar foods for an average family. This is from around the turn of the century, and there's nothing here but milk, meat, fish, chicken, and eggs. No vegetables. They never heard of spinach. The basic 4 food groups, which is probably the ultimate disaster in our recent times. In order to do this properly, you've got to have several servings of milk to get the calcium, several servings of meat to get the protein, and then fruits and vegetables and grains kind of fill things in. If you look on the back of this poster, you will find that it is put out by the National Dairy Council. You'll also notice that that's a pretty high-class piece of artwork there. You don't get those things for nothing. You have to put some money into them. In fact, if you sort foods by nutrient weight ratio, the basic 4 food group idea more or less holds water, but if you sort by nutrient calorie ratio, it goes down the tubes. It simply disappears, and there's no particular value to animal food over plant food. Most of the calcium would turn out to be in leafy green vegetables rather than in dairy products. And it's very important, if you want to be properly nourished and not be overweight, to match your nutrient intakes to your calorie intake rather than to weight. There is no RDA for weight in the human diet. You don't have to eat X pounds of anything to be properly nourished. You do have to get all of your nutrients, and probably the first reason for eating in the first place is to get enough calories to run your body. So it makes good sense to sort foods by nutrient calorie ratio. Very bad sense to sort foods by nutrient weight ratio unless you're trying to get people to eat really fatty foods, which is what this advice has been doing. Well, you've probably all seen the food guide pyramid. This is an improvement over the basic 4, but I decided to improve it a little more myself. The top part of the pyramid is fats and sugars and sweets. The next group is dairy products. And as we said, they may have a lot of calcium in them, but they also have a lot of fat and cholesterol. And then meats and poultry. And then vegetables down here, fruits, and on the bottom, the part of the pyramid where you're supposed to get most of your food, that's grains. Okay, well now, I think that the first thing you want to do to improve this food pyramid is just cut off the top, throw that out, and that leaves you with the food guide trapezoid, which looks like this. And I've rearranged things a little bit so that the grains are up here and the vegetables and fruits are down here, because they're the foods that have the highest nutrient value. So that's Harris's food guide trapezoid there. I would say that this food guide pyramid is a big improvement over the basic 4, but I think it's still founded on a couple of mistakes. The result of sorting foods by nutrient weight ratio, and secondly, I think it gives an undue value to grains. And there's no real rational reason for giving that much value to grains. It just says that grains make a huge population. We're used to the idea that what a lot of people eat that seems to maintain moderately good health is probably what we all ought to eat. And there have been all kinds of systems of nutritional theory, such as macrobiotics, which have said that you should eat nothing but grains, because the grains are the natural food of large numbers of people. Well, the reason they're the natural foods of the larger numbers of people is because they permit a large population at a relatively low cost. If you see the effect of providing a lot of cheap food that deer like to eat, for instance, on the mainland, supposing you started putting stuff out all over the place that deer liked, what would happen? The deer population would explode, sure. And we are not remarkably more intelligent than deer when it comes to reproduction. So we get a cheap food source, and first thing you know, there's 16 million of us to start with, and then there's 85 million. Currently, the population of the world is 4.5 billion. The doubling time of the human population is about 40 years, so in 40 years from now, there's going to be 9 billion people. 40 years from that, there will be 36 billion people, and I calculated that by the year 4000 AD, if we continue to reproduce at that rate, by 4000, the mass of humanity will be equal to the mass of the Earth. I haven't heard any better advice than this. It's simple, remember it. Eat as wide a variety of plant foods in as unprocessed a form as possible. It's from Susan Havala. She's an RD who is responsible for getting the American Dietetic Association a position paper on vegetarianism, which was a rather positive paper. One of the first things that every vegetarian is asked or will ask is, how do you ever get your protein? And the reason for that is that this guy back in the late 1900s went out and surveyed some German laborers, and he found that they took in about 100 grams of protein per day. So he said, well, that's how much you need, 120 grams. That's actually about 20-25% of calories from protein. This man was Dr. Carl Voigt, and at least he made a stab at dealing with the problem. He came up with a number, but the numbers have been going down yearly at least, and finally they're down to about 10% of calories from protein. 10 categories of foods. The one that will drop you below the RDA is fruit. If you went on a fruitarian diet, you might be in some risk of getting a protein deficiency. The amino acids is the next thing that comes up. Well, how do you get all of the essential amino acids? The same 10 categories. This one's a hard one to read, so I'm going to have to interpret it for you, but there are 11 amino acids here. The limiting amino acid on a vegan diet is methionine along here. The top bar here is vegetables, and if you ate nothing but vegetables from that 93 species of vegetables, you'd get 500% of the RDA for methionine, which is the limiting amino acid. So you don't really need to worry about that. Furthermore, the studies that led to the idea that certain types of protein are simply inadequate came from experiments on weanling rats. Check to see what will make weanling rats grow the fastest. Not surprisingly, the stuff that they like the best to grow on is something that resembles rat milk. Rat milk is on the bottom here, and right above it is egg protein, which you can see there's a sort of a similarity. The rat milk is not quite as high as egg, but it's got a lot of protein. Makes rats grow real fast. However, human milk looks like this. All these white bars here are much shorter than the rat's milk. Human milk is only about 5.9% of calories from protein. Rat's milk is 25% of calories from protein. Rats have to grow up real fast because they've got to get out of the nest. They've got to go out and do whatever it is that rats do, but they don't get the benefit of 9 months of lactation and 18 years of parental care and a college education. They have to get up there and go to work for themselves. William Rose, who was a nutritionist in the 40s, then studied the amino acid requirements for human adult males, and he found out, not surprisingly, that they're not too different from human milk. If you do want to balance your amino acids, it's very simple. You mix grains and legumes. You can mix corn and beans, for instance. The Mexicans do that. Or you can mix rice and soybeans, Chinese. Very easy. It's rather intuitive to do that. It makes the food taste better too, but it may not be absolutely necessary from a nutritional standpoint. So this brings us to the question, well, are there any advantages to eating meat? And this is an ad that was connected with a football game a few years back. Beefing up the bows. Well, if you wanted to turn out a bunch of large, aggressive males who are adept at running down the field and knocking other males over, you might want to feed them meat. And if you wanted to be a nightclub bouncer or a professional wrestler, you also might want to do this. But the problem with our school lunch program right now is that while the football player and the football coach may like these steaks a lot, these are getting fed to the girls too, and the girls are not planning to be large and aggressive. They'd rather like to be petite. So you're feeding the whole student body as if they're going to be football players and getting the predictable results. Direct correlation between the calories per day from animal foods and the total fat content in the diet. I couldn't put in the names of all the countries here because there are too many countries. There's 120 countries or so. But there is an almost linear relationship between animal source food intake and animal fat consumption. And this is a statistical number here. This is a correlation coefficient. If all the numbers were on the line, the R value would be 1 and the P value would be 0. 0.93 is a pretty high correlation, and P is generally taken to be less than 0.01. This is less than 0.001, much less. So there's a correlation there. If you wanted to find a quick way to be fat, eat as much animal food as you can. There's about 1,800 diet books in the literature, and this is just some that I found at the McCully Library one day. They love to talk about celebrities. This one's called Elizabeth Takes Off. This one's diet science. Somebody's going to teach you to lose weight by astrology. I looked at all of these books for the word vegetarian. I found it in a couple of books. I didn't find the word vegan in any of the books, although if you really want to get rid of your excess weight in a hurry, you should go on a vegan diet. Vegan diet is going to be probably 10 to 15% of calories from fat, and you lose weight almost without effort. The only effort is staying on the diet, and it's not really a crash diet. It's a diet that you live with for the rest of your life, and once you get onto it, it's very easy. Well, most people don't like to do things like changing their lifestyle, and going to a vegan diet would be much more trouble than taking a pill. So the pharmaceutical companies are always happy to help in this area. And this is an ad that they ran for a weight loss drug. This is about 10 years ago. This cat has had electrodes stuck in its head. And if you stimulate one side of the hypothalamus, which is a structure in the base of the brain, the cat will eat voraciously. If you stimulate another part of the hypothalamus, the cat stops eating completely. And so the pharmaceutical company wanted to make a drug that would stimulate that part of the hypothalamus that makes the cat quit eating. And they did do it, but of course it turned out to have a zillion side effects and was finally taken off the market. I don't know what happened to Kitty, but she doesn't look like she's in too great shape. The reason there's so much fat in animal food has to do with cell membranes. This is a generic cell. This could be a plant cell, but it actually is an animal cell. The outside of the animal cell is a layer of fat. It's actually a double layer of fat. And inside there's a nucleus, and then there's some inclusion structures in here that perform metabolic functions. But you don't need to know about that. What you need to know is that cell membrane is made out of fat. There's 2 layers of fat. These little blue bubbles are the soluble ends of the fat molecules. These large red structures here are proteins, and the filaments are either proteins or glycoproteins. And the little yellow doodads in here are cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is an important part of any animal cell membrane because animal cells have to make it on their own. This is an animal cell on the left side. This outer line here is that little double layer of fat, and it has to be reinforced with cholesterol, which is really tough stuff because there's nothing on the outside here. This is a plant cell, and its membrane is also made out of the little bilayer of fat, but it doesn't have to have any cholesterol, and it doesn't have to have any really saturated fat because on the outside of that cell membrane, there's a cell wall, which is made out of cellulose. Cellulose is a tough, rigid polymer of glucose. So an animal cell membrane is like a tough inner tube, and a plant cell membrane is like a flimsy inner tube with a tire on the outside. And that's the main reason why animal food will always be full of fat. It doesn't have to do with trimming off the visible fat. You can't get rid of the fat in the cell membrane, which is going to have cholesterol with it. The plant cell is going to have a certain amount of fat. Actually has a tiny amount of cholesterol too, but the amount is so tiny that you can't measure it, and so the USDA always reports it out as zero. A bit about the monies that we're paying for care. This is U.S. life expectancy since the turn of the century. This line represents the increased longevity since 1900. Our average lifespan has gone up about 15 years at birth. Now, most of that was due to the fact that in the last century there were improvements in hygiene and food supply that kept people healthier, so the infant mortality rate dropped off, and most of this longevity is due to a lowered infant mortality. Down here is the increase in longevity at the age of 65, and that's only gone up about 5 years since the turn of the century. This is medical care costs. Medical care was kind of reasonable back in the 1930s, but now it's about 12% of the gross national product. And you can see that most of the longevity here occurred before the health costs started going out the roof. Increased longevity has had very little to do with medical care. Some of the problems that come from eating animal food, first of all, you increase your incidence of blood clots. If you wanted to plug up your circulation, short of inserting corks, you could not come up with a better solution than saturated animal fat, which slows the circulation in capillaries, and cholesterol, which plugs up your arteries. Venous thrombosis, that means blood clots in the legs and, say, the lungs, correlates with the intake of animal fat, and the R value is 0.93, P is much less than 0.01. Heart disease, I guess everybody's aware that there's a relationship between animal fat and cholesterol intake, the death rate from heart disease. Correlation between heart disease and plant food consumption, that's kind of trivial because if you're going to eat less animal food, obviously you're going to eat more plant food, but you can see that the correlation coefficient is actually minus 0.79. Countries eating the least animal food have the least. There is a hormone-dependent cancer, and when you eat a lot of animal fat, it raises at least parts of the serum hormone levels, and you raise your estrogen levels and increase your risk for female breast cancer. That's probably not the only. I don't want any of you to think that any of these graphs are the whole ball of wax. They're not the explanation for all of the risk in these various diseases, but they do have a lot to do with them. Endometrial cancer, that's cancer of the womb. The more animal fat, the higher. This is also a hormone-dependent cancer. Not too many countries, but it appears like there's a correlation. R is 0.84, P is 0.001. Prostate cancer, also hormone dependent. The more fat, the higher the hormone levels, the higher the rate of prostate cancer. Insulin-dependent diabetes goes up with, I'm not sure whether it's animal protein or animal fat, but anyway, there's a probable reason for this, and it has to do with the similarity between the amino acid sequence in human lactalbumin, that's mother's milk protein, and cow milk protein. The similarity between these two proteins can be seen every time you see a vertical line here. That means there's a similarity. And these genes coded out to about an 80% identity between human lactalbumin and cow milk lactalbumin. Well, now, this confuses the immune system. If you're taking in proteins that are similar but not identical to your own, you're going to form antibodies against those foreign proteins, and they will cross-react with your own tissues. As it happens, a recent study from about 3 years ago showed that in newly diagnosed insulin-dependent diabetic children, 144 out of 144 of them had antibodies to cow milk protein. So cow milk protein probably plays a role in at least one type of diabetes, which is the insulin-dependent diabetes. It is well known that this is an autoimmune disease. It's an autoimmune disease in which the pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas, which are the insulin-making cells of the pancreas, are virtually wiped out by an autoimmune reaction in which the body attacks its own protein and destroys the insulin-making cells. Animal protein versus osteoporosis. I think all the ladies here are probably fed to hear with talk about osteoporosis. It's thinning out of the bones. Animal protein in grams per person per day correlates with hip fracture per 100,000 per year. And the correlation coefficient is 0.84 and the p-value is 0.006. There's a very strong correlation. Once again, this is not the only cause of osteoporosis. There are multiple causes. First of all, you may have the bad luck to be born Caucasian and female, and if that is your situation, you're eventually going to be Caucasian and female and postmenopausal, at which time your hormones will crash. And not having enough hormones around is a big factor in osteoporosis, but there's nothing you can do about that. That's a unfixable state at the present time. So there are some other things that you can do. One of the best things to do is start exercising and quit smoking if you haven't already. You might consider taking certain types of hormone replacement. Natural progesterone will probably turn out to be the one to use, although that's not in general use now. But also give serious consideration to going on an animal protein-free diet that is translated as vegan, because you don't want to keep on eating the stuff that's causing the problem. Now, why does it cause a problem? The sulfur amino acids in the 10 categories of food that I mentioned, the RDA for these two amino acids, cysteine, which is a non-essential amino acid, and methionine, which is the only essential sulfur amino acid, you need about this much of those two. Okay, now, if you ate nothing but vegetables, you'd get an adequate amount of methionine, as we already mentioned. If you eat nothing but fish, you get a whopping amount of these sulfur amino acids. You're getting a whopping amount with meat. You're getting a lot with dairy also, although the dairy may be compensated somewhat by the fact that it also has a lot of calcium. Whether it has enough calcium to override the adverse effects of all the sulfur amino acids is something that I have a debate about this. Break down to sulfate. Sulfate is not appreciated by your body, so it's going to wash it out in the urine, and it's going to carry calcium out with it, because the sulfate has the potential to form sulfuric acid. Your body doesn't like stuff like that roaming around in it, so it buffers the sulfuric acid with calcium. After it takes the calcium out in your urine, it then the body looks around and says, hey, where am I going to get my calcium fix? And it looks at your bones next, and that's where it takes the calcium. That's where it gets the calcium from. It replaces the serum calcium with bone calcium. This is another little bonus of the meat diet. Meat is high in purines, and the purines in some people are not readily or not properly metabolized. They break down to uric acid. Uric acid, when the concentration gets too high, settles out in joint tissue. Its favorite spot is the base of your big toe. And when that happens, it feels like the devil is chewing on your toe. That's what it feels like to have gout. Beef and dairy consumption probably have a correlation with lymphatic cancer. This was reported first in The Lancet back in 1978. Nobody paid any attention to it. As far as I know, they still are not. However, there's been a recent article that confirms it with a little more clinical information. Once again, it's the confusion effect of animal protein. Lymphatic cancer would include lymphoma and Hodgkin's disease. And you're confusing your immune system when you eat proteins that resemble your own proteins. Resemble but do not exactly replicate your own amino acid sequences. So lymphatic cancer and bovine protein. Well, I totaled all of these things up and did the best I could to come up with some kind of a eyeball estimate of how much this stuff is costing us in medical bills, and the number I get is $123 billion in 1991. So much of these diseases, venous thrombosis, endometrial cancer, lymphatic cancer, etc., are costing us and medical care. That does not include human suffering. That does not include premature death. This is just the money it costs to treat people that have these things. $123 billion was about 1/6 of the medical budget, and the medical budget was about 12% of the gross national product, so about 2% of the gross national product is going to treat the diseases caused by animal food consumption. These are some of my colleagues at work here. This is the well-known wallotectomy. Here's the various sources, my estimates, in case anybody's interested. Bag it here. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thanks a lot. I've now been a vegetarian for 46 years and a doctor for 35, I guess. And in that period of time, I have seen so much medical evidence turned up, which incriminates meat and other animal foods in the etiology of a lot of human disease, that I sort of think the vegetarians are right. Estimated U.S. medical costs resulting from animal source food. I got a total of about $123 billion in 1991. That's a lot of change. And that's money that we have wasted treating people for diseases that could have been prevented by not eating animal food.
I wanted to know if the cholesterol that you produce in your own body is different than the cholesterol that you eat from animal fat or whatever has cholesterol.
Exactly the same kind. Cholesterol is cholesterol. There is no difference in the structural formula of the cholesterol you make and the cholesterol that you eat. The difference is probably in the way in which your body handles it. I think the cholesterol that you eat is probably the stuff that's getting laid down in your pipes. I don't think that the cholesterol that you manufacture yourself is. When I started writing this book, my big question was, how come people haven't figured this out? I've figured it out 46 years ago. Pythagoras figured it out 2,500 years ago. George Bernard Shaw figured it out about 100 years ago, and there have been vegetarians throughout history who realized that there's something wrong with animal food, and they did something about it, but we're still putting beaucoup bucks into the production of animal food. And I wanted to find out, well, is there a rational reason for this? Are there some essential nutrients, for instance, that are only synthesized by animals? And the answer is no. There are about 50 essential nutrients. About half of them are minerals, and they're synthesized neither by animals nor by plants. They're synthesized by the nuclear fusion processes that go on inside stars. Now, the other 25 or so organic nutrients are all synthesized either by plants or by microbes, bacteria. So the only things that you get that are unique when you eat an animal, you're getting a lot of secondhand essential nutrients, but you're getting things that you don't want, like cholesterol and saturated fat. So you're paying an awful lot of money for stuff that you could have gotten directly by eating the plants. These are the USDA price supports. This was 1987. I haven't been able to scramble around in the numbers fast enough to stay up to date, but the United States Department of Agriculture has been giving money to certain sectors of the agricultural community since about 1933. It was one of the benefits of the Roosevelt administration. He created an organization called the Commodities Credit Corporation, and the CCC floats what are called non-recourse loans to farmers. And in this year, the total in 1987 was $23.85 billion. The fact of the matter is that your tax monies are being used to support the production of these 21 agricultural products. I haven't been able to find a single thing on this list that really deserves to be supported. All of these feed grains are nutritious if you eat them, but they're not making them for you to eat. They're making them for the cattle to eat for the most part, and what's left over is what you get. Oil seeds, okay, now, they didn't get a whole lot of money, but consider oil seeds. Let's take sunflower seeds as an example. Sunflower seeds are a pretty good nutritional bargain. They've got a lot of protein. fair distribution of vitamins and minerals, and you can stay pretty healthy eating sunflower seeds and a few leafy green vegetables. But what happens is the seeds are ground down for the oil. The oil is processed and you wind up eating an oil which is 100% fat. What's left over is the oilseed mash, and that's fed to the animals. That's turned into animal feed once again. Oh, dried beans aren't bad. Sugar beets, that's refined sugar. There's no reason why we should be paying to have holes appear in our teeth where we would prefer holes not to be. Somebody explain Angora goats to me. Why should we be paying for the production of Angora goats? Wool is another subsidy. The sheep are eaten and the wool is used for clothing. Honey, concentrated carbohydrate. It's almost as worthless as white sugar. There are two things that you do not see on that list. Vegetables and fruits. Those are specific. Vegetables and fruits, which are the things that people ought to be eating in this country the most, are the things that the USDA doesn't support. If you're growing spinach in your back lot, you're on your own, pal. You don't get any help from the government. Two leafy green vegetables that have really good nutrient indices. One is spinach, and the other is luau leaf, taro leaf. Oh. Very good stuff, but they're both loaded with oxalic acid. And how many people have tried to eat luau leaf? Try eating it raw sometime if you want it. Possibly the last experience you will ever have. This stuff has got so much oxalic acid that once it gets to the back of your throat, it will actually cause spasm. And some people almost choke to death on uncooked luau leaf. But everybody has their own tolerance, and I recommend luau leaf. The only thing that you have to do is learn how to cook it to your personal specifications, because we all have our own level at which we can tolerate the oxalic acid in the taro leaf. But it's a good food, and it's about equivalent to spinach.
What does this oxalic acid do that's detrimental to you?
Well, it complexes with the calcium. It forms calcium oxalate. And calcium oxalate is not readily absorbed by your intestine. So you don't get the benefit of the calcium from spinach and luau leaf as readily as if you were eating, say, romaine lettuce or mustard greens or collard greens. I think that they've made a little bit too much out of this. I don't really want to put the evil eye on spinach and luau leaf, because I think they're really good foods. But there is evidence that it reduces the calcium availability. The question is romaine lettuce higher in nutrient value than other types of lettuce? And the answer is yes. There's just no comparison between romaine and, say, head lettuce. Head lettuce is the stuff you get in all the fast food places, if you get any lettuce at all. I was surprised when I found out the nutritional value of romaine. Georgie was asking about it one day, so I just plugged it in and checked to see what it had, and it seems to be on the top of just about every nutrient index for all of the leafy green vegetables. It's as good as spinach. It's as good as collard green. So when you eat lettuce, make sure that it's got a lot of color, because the color is where the nutrition comes from. As a matter of fact, a general rule, eat as wide a variety of plant foods in as varied a form as possible. And at the top of the list of plant foods should be leafy greens, because they have the highest nutrient values of all the vegetables, and in fact they have the highest nutrient values of all foods. And the reason is very simple. Leafy greens, or green leaves, are the biochemical guts of a plant. All of the biochemical processes that go in a plant are dependent on the process of photosynthesis. The leaf is big and thin for the simple purpose of trapping light from the sun. So all of the biochemical machinery, which for the most part is the same machinery that you need in your body, is up in the leaf. It's not down in the root. The potato root has got less nutritional value than the potato leaf. The problem is potato leaves don't agree with you very well. So you ought to center your diet on fresh vegetables, particularly leafy green vegetables, and fruits, and then fill in your calorie requirements with starchy things like potatoes and pasta and grains. But make the fresh vegetables the center of your food. Okay, 2 questions. What about the depletion of minerals in the soil? Well, that's probably not a good thing, but if the plants can't live on the soil, then nothing's going to live there. And if they can live, then animals can live in the same area, including us. And while it would be better to have higher mineral values in our vegetables, I don't think it's all that important. Now the next question is, how about the pesticides? That is a problem, but if you're concerned with pesticides in your food, consider this. The pesticides that get on the plant foods that you eat, you can wash off under the tap because they're going to stay on the outside. The pesticides that get into the animal are stored in the animal's fat because most of the pesticides are fat soluble and they will be absorbed by the animal. So if you're concerned about pesticides in your food, the most important thing is to cut the animals out of your diet because that's where the high pesticide concentrations are going to be. But I think pesticides were invented by Daffy Duck. They have all the stupid ideas. You know, I can remember when I was about 8 years old, back in the 1930s, the flit gun. The flit gun was a gadget that you were to squirt at a fly. If a fly came around and buzzed at you a few times, you get out the flit gun, and the motto was "Quick Minnie the Flit." Well, there's something wrong about contaminating the air you breathe just to pick off one little fly. It would be better to use a fly swatter. Then the pesticide folks got into handling agricultural pests, and that was a Rube Goldberg from the start because it's obvious that you're never going to be able to kill all of the pests. Some of them are going to survive regardless of how many airplanes you fly over the field with bucket loads of pesticide coming down. There's always going to be some surviving bugs, and those bugs are going to be the ones that are resistant to the pesticide that you use. So all you do by using pesticides is you create bigger and better bugs. A far more rational way to approach the problem of all nuisance animals, including insects, is reproduction control. We could solve most of the animal rights problems or animal abuse problems in the country. There's a technology on the development now which is probably going to solve the problem. And you take the zona pellucida from one species, say a pig, and you grind it up and you inject it into another species like a rabbit. Zona pellucida causes antibody formation in the rabbit, which cross-reacts with the rabbit's own zona pellucida, and so that rabbit is sterile. You can do it the other way around. You can take the zona pellucida from a rabbit and inject it into a pig, and you'll prohibit the reproduction of pigs. And the best way to handle this is not by killing individuals, but simply to interrupt the reproductive cycle. Some people, particularly people in the vegetarian movement, tend to tell you, well, you shouldn't juice foods because you lose too much fiber. You lose a lot of the nutrients. So I decided to compare that. Compared the nutrient values for carrot juice versus a whole carrot. And if you look at all of these bars here, about the only one in which there appears to be much of a difference in the relative abundance of these nutrients is alpha tocopherol, which is vitamin E. It looks like the whole carrot might have a little more of that. But the rest of the way, they're just about neck and neck. You're not losing a significant amount of anything when you juice foods, and what you are doing is preventing excessive wear on your molars because you're letting Thomas Edison do the grinding for you. And you end up with a pretty good nutritional mix. There are people who call themselves raw food vegans. They only eat raw vegetables. And they make a pretty good argument that this is a much healthier way to eat. I've seen a lot of raw food vegans in my day, and I am here to tell you most of them do look pretty healthy. They all also look very skinny. And if you ever want to lose weight in a hurry, try eating nothing but raw food. Raw vegetable food. It's really a good nutritional source because you will always meet your nutritional requirements for all of the essential nutrients way before you have filled your calorie requirements. You'll fill your stomach and you'll meet your nutrient needs before you meet your calorie needs. They say that the raw foods are better because they have enzymes that are still active. Everybody heard about the enzyme theory? Eat the foods that are still alive because the enzymes are still functioning. I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason is because the foods that you have to cook in order to make them edible, like potatoes, for instance, and brown rice. Anybody ever try to eat raw brown rice? That's really hard on the teeth. And winter wheat and pasta. All of these things have to be cooked in order to eat them. And it happens that their abundance of various nutrients like protein, calcium, iron, riboflavin, vitamin A, and zinc, just for 6 examples, is much less than these foods here, which you can eat raw. For instance, you can eat spinach raw. You could actually fill out your entire day's nutrient requirements by eating about 5 pounds of spinach. I tried filling out my entire day's calorie requirements by eating spinach, and that would require about a bushel of spinach. And I will tell you that a bushel of spinach generates a lot of amusement at the checkout counter, and you give up after about 5 pounds of it. And the rest of it wound up in the wastebasket that day, but it doesn't matter because 5 pounds and you've met your RDA for everything. V4 juice, that's my own concoction of carrot, 1 carrot, a stalk of celery, a sprig of parsley, and a tomato. You run it through a juicer and it's got very good nutrient value. Romaine lettuce, exceptionally good food. Alfalfa sprouts. And then I average 96 vegetables. But all these other things that you generally eat cooked have much lower nutrient values. Well, I think I'll call it at that. Are there any questions?
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344, or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.